At the will reading, my parents laughed as they handed my sister $6.9 million. Me? They gave me $1 and said, "Go earn your own." My mom smirked. Some kids just don't measure up. But when the lawyer read Grandpa's final letter, my mom started screaming. I never thought the day I saw my sister receive $6.9 million while I got $1 would be the day my entire world shattered, but it was. That cold, hard sum wasn't just about money, it was the chilling sound of a betrayal I didn't even know existed yet. I was 28 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, watching my sister Caroline gleam with triumph, and the look in Grandpa's attorney's eye, it was unsettling. My grandfather, Maxwell, had been my hero, my confidant, my biggest supporter. So why on earth would he leave me with just $1 and a mysterious, sealed envelope? The hurt in my chest was a raw, physical pain. Something wasn't adding up. Before I tell you how his final, brilliant chess move turned my family completely upside down, let me just say, if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, you're going to want to hear this. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home outside of Boston, things looked normal on the surface. Our house wasn't huge, but my parents, Richard and Elizabeth Riley, made sure we had the latest gadgets and wore all the right brands. Appearances? Oh, they were everything to my folks. My sister Caroline was 3 years older, and she was always the golden child. Beautiful, incredibly sociable, and most importantly to my parents, practical. She followed their blueprint perfectly: prestigious business school, perfect posture, that perfect executive wife-in-training smile. Every family gathering, you could count on a detailed update on Caroline's latest accomplishments. My parents would just beam with pride. Then there was me. From a young age, I was drawn to science, especially environmental conservation. While Caroline spent her weekends at country club events, I was volunteering at wildlife rehab centers or doing beach cleanups. My passion was always met with this thinly veiled disappointment from my parents. "Environmental science won't pay for the lifestyle you're accustomed to, Amanda," my mother would sigh, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Caroline understands the importance of stability." But there was one person who saw me differently. My grandfather Maxwell. He was a retired investment banker with these sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Grandpa Maxwell was definitely unconventional in our status-conscious family. He'd made a fortune through smart investments, but he lived modestly and gave generously to causes he truly believed in. He wore the same worn leather watch for years, despite my mother's constant attempts to buy him something more appropriate. "The true value of something isn't in its price tag, Mandy," he'd tell me, using the nickname only he was allowed. "It's in the purpose it serves." During college summer breaks, I'd visit his lake house in the Berkshires. While my parents and Caroline were off vacationing in European capitals, Grandpa and I would just sit on his dock, fishing and talking about everything from climate change to philosophy. He never, not once, made me feel like my interests were impractical or disappointing. "The world needs more people who care about its future than its stock market," he'd say. "Your passion has purpose, Mandy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Family gatherings were a whole other story. Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners felt more like performance reviews than celebrations. My mother orchestrated everything to perfection, from the table settings to the carefully curated conversations designed to highlight Caroline's achievements. "Caroline just secured a summer internship at Goldman Sachs," my mother would announce, serving pie with a triumphant smile. Then, the inevitable pivot to me. "Amanda is still exploring her options," she'd say, her smile tight, never reaching her eyes. My father, a corporate attorney with perpetually furrowed brows, would chime in with practical advice that always felt more like criticism. "There's no money in saving trees, Amanda. It's time to think about your future realistically." Grandpa Maxwell would wink at me across the table, sometimes changing the subject, other times directly challenging my parents. "Not everyone measures success by their bank account, Richard," he once told my father. "Some of the richest people I know have never set foot on Wall Street." The tension would thicken. My mother would clear her throat and redirect to safer topics, but I'd catch Grandpa's subtle nod of encouragement. In those moments, I knew I had at least one ally in the family. When Grandpa was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, the dynamic shifted. Suddenly, my parents and Caroline were making frequent visits to his home, bringing expensive gifts, offering to help manage his affairs. Their concern seemed to swell in direct proportion to his net worth, which, even I knew, was substantial. Me? I just visited him like I always had, bringing homemade soup and sitting with him as he grew weaker. We'd watch old westerns or I'd read to him from his favorite mystery novels. During one of my last visits, 3 months before he passed, he seemed unusually alert despite his medication. "Mandy," he said, taking my hand with surprising strength. "Remember that timing is everything in investments, and in life." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" I asked, confused. He smiled cryptically. Patience is its own reward. The truth always rises to the surface eventually. Then, he just changed the subject, asking about my latest research project. I got the call about his passing on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in the field collecting water samples when my phone rang. My mother's voice was formal, almost businesslike. Your grandfather passed this morning. The funeral is being arranged for Friday. Please wear something appropriate. No comfort. No acknowledgement of the special bond we'd shared. Just logistics and appearance concerns. The funeral was exactly what my mother wanted, elegant, restrained, and impressive to all the right people. I watched her introduce herself to Grandpa's former colleagues, networking even in grief. Caroline wore designer black, with perfect makeup that somehow still looked flawless when she shed precisely 2 tears during the eulogy. My father spent most of the reception discussing investment strategies with Grandpa's financial advisors. I stood alone by the photo display I'd helped arrange, looking at snapshots of Grandpa's life, a young man in the army, holding my mother as a baby, teaching me to fish when I was 7. A rich, vibrant life, reduced to a collage and polite conversation over expensive canapés. A week later, we got notice from Mr. Peterson, Grandpa's attorney, about the reading of the will. My mother immediately went shopping for appropriate attire. Caroline canceled client meetings. My father researched estate tax implications. Me? I just wanted closure, a final connection to the man who had truly seen me when the rest of my family looked right through me. I didn't expect much in terms of inheritance. Grandpa's true material things weren't important to me. What I hoped for was perhaps some final words of wisdom, maybe his fishing gear or the collection of conservation books we'd talked about. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my apartment balcony, looking at the stars, remembering how Grandpa had taught me constellations at the lake house. Some patterns are only visible when you know what to look for, he'd said. I couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would become. The offices of Peterson Blackwell and Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Boston, a subtle reminder of the wealth that passed through these rooms daily. The conference room where we gathered featured an imposing mahogany table, gleaming under soft lighting, leather chairs that creaked with newness, and walls lined with law books that looked more decorative than used. My mother arrived first, of course. Elizabeth Riley never missed an opportunity to be punctual and prepared, especially when money was involved. She wore a navy Chanel suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her ash blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob that didn't move when she turned her head sharply to assess my outfit. You could have made more of an effort, Amanda, she whispered, eyeing my simple black dress. This is an important day. My father strode in next, checking his Rolex and nodding curtly to Mr. Peterson. Richard Riley had the perpetual look of a man calculating costs and benefits, even at his own father-in-law's will reading. His eyes held a gleam of anticipation. Caroline arrived last, making an entrance in stiletto heels that clicked importantly across the hardwood floor. She air-kissed my cheeks, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering as she took the seat beside our mother, crossing her legs elegantly and placing her designer handbag precisely in her lap. I sat slightly apart from them, feeling like an outsider in my own family. The distance wasn't accidental. Mr. Peterson wasn't alone. Harold Winters, my grandfather's best friend of 50 years, sat quietly in a corner chair. Marta Jimenez, Grandpa's housekeeper of 20 years, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Unlike my family's composed faces, hers showed genuine grief. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Peterson began, adjusting his glasses. Maxwell was very specific about how this proceeding should unfold. My mother straightened, her smile tightening. We're all eager to honor his wishes, of course. Mr. Peterson nodded, unfolding a document. I'll begin with some smaller bequests before addressing the main estate. The smaller bequests took nearly 30 minutes. Grandpa had left generous amounts to his favorite charities, his staff, and several friends. Harold received Grandpa's vintage car collection. Marta was given a life estate in the guest house on Grandpa's main property and a sum that made her gasp. My mother's foot tapped with increasing impatience. My father checked his watch twice. Caroline maintained her pleasant expression, but her fingers drummed silently against her purse. Now to the main distributions, Mr. Peterson said finally. To my daughter Elizabeth and her husband, Richard, I leave my primary residence in Beacon Hill and my vacation property in Palm Beach. My mother's smile became genuine for the first time that day. The properties were worth millions. To my granddaughter Caroline Riley, I leave the sum of $6.9 million, to be distributed in a trust as outlined in Section 4 of this document. Caroline's intake of breath was audible. She reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it triumphantly. My father nodded in approval. All eyes turned to me. I felt a strange hollowness form in my stomach. To my granddaughter, Amanda Grace Riley, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice softening slightly. I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as I struggled to maintain my composure. Additionally, Mr. Peterson continued, Amanda is to receive this sealed envelope, to be opened after the conclusion of today's reading. He handed me a thick manila envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted it. The silence broke with my mother's short, sharp laugh. Well, that's clarifying, isn't it? She said, not bothering to lower her voice. Always the disappointment. Caroline, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable, though the gleam of triumph never quite left her eyes. I'm sure Grandpa had his reasons, she said, in a tone that suggested those reasons must have been my own failings. My father simply shook his head, the gesture dismissing me as effectively as his words often had. I clutched the envelope, fighting the urge to flee the room, to escape the pity in Harold's eyes, the confusion on Marta's face, and the barely concealed satisfaction on my family's. Pride kept me in my seat. Whatever Grandpa's reasons, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Is that all? My mother asked, already gathering her purse, ready to move on to celebrating Caroline's windfall. Actually, no, Mr. Peterson said. Maxwell prepared a video to be played after the initial reading. He was most insistent about everyone remaining present for it. My father's annoyance was palpable. Is that really necessary? We all have commitments this afternoon. It is a condition of the will, Mr. Peterson said firmly. All beneficiaries must be present for the entire proceeding, or risk forfeiture. That settled it. No matter how dismissive they were of me, my family would sit through hours of content before risking their newfound wealth. Mr. Peterson dimmed the lights and activated a screen that descended from the ceiling. After a moment of static, my grandfather's face appeared, recorded perhaps a month before his death. He looked frail, the cancer having taken its toll, but his eyes remained sharp, alert, the eyes of a man who had built a fortune by seeing what others missed. None of us were prepared for what came next. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, his voice stronger on video than it had been in his final weeks, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. And you're all sitting in Peterson's uncomfortable conference chairs, wondering what this old man has up his sleeve. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I recognized that expression. It was the same one he wore when he was about to win at chess, a game he taught me during rainy afternoons at the lake house. First, to my dear friend Harold, thank you for 50 years of honesty. In a world of yes men, you always told me the truth, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. The cars are yours because you appreciated them for their craftsmanship, not their price tags. Harold nodded silently, a tear tracking down his weathered cheek. To Marta, whose kindness made my house a home. Your dignity and work ethic reminded me daily of what truly matters. The guest house has always been more yours than mine. Marta whispered something in Spanish, pressing the tissue to her lips. Grandpa shifted in his seat, and his expression changed subtly as he addressed my parents. Elizabeth, my only daughter. You were always ambitious, even as a little girl. I remember how determined you were to have the biggest dollhouse, the prettiest dresses. Richard, you and I have had our differences over the years, but I never doubted your dedication to the lifestyle you chose. My mother's smile faltered slightly. There was something in Grandpa's tone, not quite criticism, but not the warm praise she'd clearly expected. To Caroline, congratulations on your inheritance. You've always understood the value of money and appearances. I've structured your trust with quarterly distributions to ensure it provides for you over time. Use it wisely. Caroline's expression flickered between satisfaction and uncertainty. Grandpa's words seemed double-edged, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Then Grandpa looked directly into the camera, and I had the uncanny feeling he was looking right at me. Amanda, my Mandy, you see what others miss. You always have, from the time you were small and noticed the bird's nest in the oak tree that everyone else walked past. Remember what I told you about timing and patience. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. My throat tightened. Even from beyond, he saw me. Grandpa's expression became serious. Now to the matter at hand. My will may seem straightforward, perhaps even unfair to some of you. But there's more to this story, as there usually is in life. He leaned forward. I've arranged a series of tasks that must be completed before the full terms of my estate can be implemented. Consider it my final lesson to all of you. My father made a sound of protest, quickly silenced by my mother's sharp elbow to his side. Mr. Peterson has been instructed to provide sealed letters with specific opening dates and instructions. All conditions must be followed exactly as written. Any attempt to contest this will or circumvent the process will result in the entirety of my estate, every property, investment, and penny, being immediately transferred to the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Conservation. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible. My father's face darkened. Caroline's perfect posture stiffened. The first step begins today. Amanda, the envelope you've received contains the key to my lake house and instructions for the first task. I suggest you go there immediately. Grandpa's eyes twinkled with that familiar mischievous light I'd loved since childhood. And remember, things aren't always as they appear. Sometimes a single dollar can be worth more than millions. The screen went black, and the lights came up. All eyes turned to me and the envelope in my hands. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. That concludes today's official reading. As stated, any attempts to contest the will or interfere with the process Mr. Riley has established will trigger the charitable remainder clause. My mother recovered first, her social mask sliding back into place. Well, that was certainly dramatic, she said with a forced laugh. Amanda will naturally accompany you to the lake house. Family support and all that. The sudden shift from dismissal to family support wasn't lost on me. An hour ago, I was a disappointment. Now, I was their access point to whatever game Grandpa had set up. I don't think that's necessary, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Don't be ridiculous, my father cut in. This clearly affects all of us. We'll drive up together tomorrow morning. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I stood my ground against my father's authoritative tone. No. Grandpa addressed the envelope to me, and I'll go alone. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly. Amanda, my mother hissed, her composure slipping. This is not the time for your usual stubbornness. Actually, Mr. Peterson interjected, the instructions are quite specific that Amanda must be the one to open the lake house and retrieve the next communication. Others may visit subsequently, but the initial task is hers alone. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but the threat of the charitable remainder clause was enough to silence further protests. As we gathered our things to leave, Caroline approached me in the hallway outside the conference room, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I could drive up with you tomorrow, she offered, her voice lowered so our parents couldn't hear, just for support. This is all very strange. I studied my sister's face, trying to discern her true motivation. Was this genuine concern, or was she simply ensuring her access to the next phase of Grandpa's plan? I need to do this alone first, I said finally. But I'll call you after. She nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across her features before her composed smile returned. Of course, just keep us in the loop, okay? As I walked to my car, clutching the unopened envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa's final game had only just begun. And for once, I wasn't simply a pawn on someone else's board. The 2-hour drive to the Berkshires gave me time to think. I waited until I was well outside Boston before pulling over at a rest stop to open Grandpa's envelope. Inside was the promised key, attached to the familiar fish-shaped keychain I'd given him for his 70th birthday. There was also a letter, written in his distinctive slanted handwriting. Mandy, it began. If you're reading this, then the first phase is complete. Go to the lake house alone. In my study, you'll find the answers to questions you haven't thought to ask yet. Remember our chess games. The first move is never the most important one. It's the setup that matters. Trust yourself. Love, Grandpa. Cryptic as ever, even from beyond. I smiled despite myself and continued driving, memories flooding back with each familiar turn in the road. The lake house came into view just as the afternoon sun hit the water, creating those diamonds of light that had fascinated me since childhood. The modest, frame cabin with its wide deck overlooking the water was exactly as I remembered, though perhaps a bit more weathered. Grandpa had refused my mother's repeated suggestions to update or expand the property. Some things are perfect just as they are, he'd always said. I parked. And was reaching for my overnight bag when another car pulled up behind me. Then another. My heart sank as I recognized my parents' Mercedes and Caroline's BMW. Surprise. Caroline called out, a little too brightly, as she emerged from her car. We thought we'd join you after all. Family adventure. My mother didn't bother with pretense. We're not letting you handle this alone, Amanda. There's clearly something significant happening, and we all have a stake in the outcome. The will specified that I should come alone, I reminded them, anger building inside me. For the initial entry only, my father countered smoothly. Peterson confirmed we could join afterward. And look, you've arrived first. You'll enter first. We're just here to support the process. Support the process, not support me. The distinction was clear. Rather than argue further, I turned and walked to the front door. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click, and the door swung open on slightly creaky hinges. The scent of pine and old books, Grandpa's scent, greeted me, and for a moment I stood frozen in the doorway, half expecting to hear his voice calling from the kitchen, offering hot chocolate. The house was exactly as he'd left it, though a fine layer of dust covered the surfaces. Fishing rod still leaned in the corner by the door. His reading glasses sat on the side table next to his favorite armchair, a bookmark still protruding from the mystery novel he'd been reading. My family pushed in behind me, their designer shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. The sound was jarringly out of place in this sanctuary of simplicity. God, it's stuffy in here, my mother complained, moving immediately to open windows. I've always said this place needs a proper renovation. My father was already assessing, his eyes cataloging items of potential value. The property itself is the real asset. Lakefront in this area goes for a premium now. Caroline moved to the mantel, picking up framed photos, studying them with newfound interest. I forgot how many pictures of you he had here, she said, her tone difficult to read. I ignored them all and moved toward the hallway that led to Grandpa's study. This door had always been kept locked when we visited as children. Not out of secrecy, but respect. Everyone needs a space that's entirely their own, he'd explained. The fish keychain held a second, smaller key that fit this lock perfectly. I felt my family hovering behind me as the door swung open. The study was smaller than I remembered from my few childhood glimpses. Walls of bookshelves surrounded a simple oak desk positioned to look out over the lake. Maps of various countries were pinned to a corkboard. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a worn leather chair sat waiting, as if Grandpa had just stepped out momentarily. Start looking for anything valuable, my father instructed, moving immediately to the filing cabinets. Investment records, property deeds, anything that might explain what's happening. Richard, my mother scolded, though her own eyes were scanning the room calculatingly. Show some respect. Maxwell was her father-in-law. I approached the desk slowly, drawn to a framed photo I'd never seen before. It showed a much younger Grandpa standing proudly in front of a small office building. The sign read, Riley Innovations. Something tickled at my memory, but before I could grasp it, Caroline was beside me. What's that? She asked, reaching for the photo. I don't know, I admitted. I've never seen it before. My father glanced over. Riley Innovations? Never heard of it. Something in his tone made me look up sharply, but his expression gave nothing away as he returned to rifling through files. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers written on it, followed by a question. Where did it all begin? It's a puzzle, I murmured, studying the numbers. They looked like dates followed by dollar amounts. The earliest was from 50 years ago, 2,975. That number resonated with something Grandpa had once told me about his first investment. While my family continued searching the room, I sat in Grandpa's chair and opened the desk drawer. Inside was a leather-bound book with First Steps embossed on the cover. When I opened it, I found records of Grandpa's earliest investments, including the $2,975 he'd invested in a small technology company in 1975, his first major success. What did you find? My mother appeared instantly at my shoulder. Just Grandpa's old investment diary, I said, continuing to page through it. The final entry caught my eye. A note that seemed out of place among the financial records, the truth is in the foundation. Remember to look beneath the surface. As I pondered this, my attention was drawn to a small decorative chess piece, a knight that had always sat on Grandpa's desk. On impulse, I picked it up and examined it. The bottom felt loose. When I twisted it, the base came away, revealing a tiny compartment containing a small key and a folded note. What's that? Caroline asked, suddenly beside me again. I'm not sure, I said truthfully, unfolding the note. Second letter in the floor safe. Combination, date of betrayal. My father had found an old photo album and was flipping through it impatiently. Nothing but sentimental nonsense, he muttered, tossing it aside carelessly. Several photos slipped out, scattering across the floor. Richard, my mother snapped, but she wasn't concerned about the photos. She was pulling pages from the album and examining them closely before discarding those that apparently didn't interest her. There must be some record of his investments here. I knelt to gather the fallen photos, noticing they were mostly of Grandpa with my mother as a child and later with me. One caught my attention, a newspaper clipping with the headline, Local Entrepreneur Sells Patent for Millions. Grandpa stood shaking hands with another man, both smiling for the camera. The caption read, Maxwell Riley sells innovative circuit design to Wilson Technologies. Mom, I said slowly. Did Grandpa own a company called Riley Innovations? Her hands froze in their destructive sorting. That was before your time, she dismissed, a small venture that didn't amount to much. But her voice had an edge. I recognized the same tone she used when covering up something uncomfortable at dinner parties. Meanwhile, I was examining the floor, looking for any sign of a safe. In the corner, partially hidden by a small rug, I noticed a seam in the hardwood. Pulling back the rug revealed a floor safe. Its dial waiting for the combination. Date of betrayal, I murmured to myself. What did that mean? My father was on his phone, speaking in low tones about property values and development potential. Caroline was opening and closing books on the shelves, checking for hidden contents. I stared at the newspaper clipping again, noting the date, June 17, 1995. Something clicked in my mind. I entered the number 61,795 into the safe's combination dial. With a satisfying click, the door released. Inside was another envelope, thicker than the first, and a small leather notebook with a rubber band around it. Before anyone could reach it, I grabbed both items and stood up. What did you find? My father was suddenly focused entirely on me, his phone call forgotten. Another letter from Grandpa, I said, holding the envelope close. And a notebook. Well, open it, my mother demanded, her composure slipping further. This treasure hunt has gone on long enough. I think I'm supposed to read it privately first, I said, thinking quickly. That's absurd, my father cut in. This concerns all of us. Whatever game our grandfather is playing affects the entire family. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly, I reminded them, echoing Mr. Peterson's earlier warning. I'm not risking the charitable remainder clause because you're impatient. My mother's eyes narrowed dangerously. Amanda Grace Riley, you'll show us that letter immediately. We are your parents and this is a family matter. Something in me snapped. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, and criticized crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity and resolve. No, I said simply. Grandpa addressed this to me. I'll read it first and share what's appropriate afterward. My father took a step toward me, his face darkening. You ungrateful, stop it, Dad, Caroline interrupted suddenly. She's right. We can't risk triggering that clause. My parents turned to her in surprise. Caroline never contradicted them. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. I have 6.9 million reasons to make sure we follow the rules exactly. Let Amanda read the letter first. It wasn't support, exactly, but it was something. I seized the moment to move toward the door. I'm going to read this in private. I'll let you know if there's anything you need to know. This is ridiculous, my mother fumed. What could possibly be so secret? I guess we'll find out, I replied, walking out of the study with more confidence than I felt. As I headed for the door, Caroline followed me into the hallway. Amanda, wait, she said, her voice unusually hesitant. There's something you should know. I paused, studying my sister's face. For once, her perfect mask had slipped, revealing genuine conflict underneath. What is it? She glanced back toward the study, ensuring our parents couldn't hear. Things aren't great with Mom and Dad financially. Dad's firm lost some major clients last year. They've been living on credit and appearances. They're counting on this inheritance. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given our family's obsession with status, but it did. Why are you telling me this? Caroline's smile was bitter. Maybe I'm tired of the act, too. Just be careful. They're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. Before I could respond, we heard our parents emerging from the study. I hurried out the front door, letter and notebook clutched tightly against my chest. I needed space to think, to understand what Grandpa was trying to show me. This isn't over, Amanda, my father called after me. You can't keep family matters to yourself. I kept walking, not looking back. For the first time, I was beginning to understand that family matters might have a double meaning in the story Grandpa was unfolding. I drove into town and checked into the small inn where Grandpa and I used to have lunch after our fishing trips. The innkeeper, Martha, recognized me immediately. Amanda, it's been too long, she said warmly. I was so sorry to hear about Maxwell. He was one of the good ones. Thanks, Martha. I miss him. Are you staying at the lake house? She asked, handing me a room key. Not tonight. Too many memories, I said, not mentioning the family invasion. And I need some quiet to go through some of Grandpa's papers. She nodded understandingly. Room 8 has the best view of the mountains. Maxwell always said it helped him think. Once settled in the cozy room, I spread the contents of the envelope on the bed. There was another letter from Grandpa, but also several legal documents and old newspaper clippings. I opened the notebook first. What I found inside stunned me. It was a detailed record of Grandpa's true financial holdings, far more extensive than what had been revealed in the will. Properties across 3 continents, investment portfolios, patents, and business interests totaling well over $24 million. The $1 I'd inherited seemed even more symbolic in comparison. I turned to Grandpa's letter next, my hands trembling slightly. Mandy, it began. If you're reading this, you've taken the first step in understanding why things are as they are. The notebook contains the truth about my estate, far more substantial than what was revealed at the reading. But money is just money. What matters is the truth behind it. Your next task is to investigate Riley Innovations. The company's records are held by Peterson in a separate file. Call him, and he'll provide access. Once you understand what happened there, you'll know why I've structured things this way. Be careful, Mandy. The people closest to us can sometimes be the ones we know least. Trust your instincts. They've always been good. Love, Grandpa. I immediately called Mr. Peterson, who wasn't surprised to hear from me. Maxwell anticipated your call around this time, he said. I have the Riley Innovations files ready. I can send them securely to your email now. Within minutes, my laptop pinged with the arrival of dozens of scanned documents. As I read through them, the story of Riley Innovations emerged, and with it, a disturbing revelation about my family. Grandpa had founded Riley Innovations in the early 1990s, developing a revolutionary circuit design that promised to transform computing efficiency. The company was small but growing, with several patents pending. Then, in 1995, he suddenly sold everything to Wilson Technologies for a fraction of its worth. The timing struck me as odd. Why would a savvy businessman like my grandfather sell a promising company for less than its value? I dug deeper into the files. There it was, a memo from Richard Riley, my father, who had been handling some legal work for the company. He had apparently advised Grandpa that a competing patent would render their technology worthless, recommending an immediate sale. 6 months later, Wilson Technologies had used Grandpa's design to launch their most successful product line ever, making billions. No competing patent had ever emerged. And the most damning detail. My mother had been working at Wilson Technologies in their acquisitions department at the time. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My parents had orchestrated the sale of Grandpa's company, presumably receiving compensation from Wilson that wasn't reflected in the official sale. They had betrayed him for financial gain. I sat back, stunned. Was this what Grandpa had meant by his greatest disappointment? A memory surfaced. Grandpa telling me years ago about making a mistake and trusting the wrong people. Sometimes those closest to. You can be blind to your best interests, he'd said. I thought he was talking about business associates, not family. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson again. I found the Riley Innovations documents, I said. Did my grandfather know about my parents' involvement? He discovered the truth about 5 years ago, Peterson confirmed. An old colleague from Wilson came clean about the backdoor dealings. Maxwell was devastated isn't a strong enough word, but he was also strategic. He wanted proof before confronting anyone. And did he get it? Yes. Everything is documented in the files I sent you. There's more, Amanda. Your grandfather restructured his entire estate plan after learning the truth. What you saw at the reading was just the surface. I spent the day reviewing everything, my shock gradually giving way to anger. By evening, I was ready. I drove back to the lake house, knowing my family would still be there. They were sitting on the deck, drinking wine and discussing development potential for the property when I arrived. Their conversation halted abruptly when they saw my face. Amanda, my mother began with false brightness. We were just discussing how to profit from Grandpa's home, I finished for her. Or were you reminiscing about Riley Innovations and how successfully you engineered its sale? The wine glass nearly slipped from my mother's hand. My father's face hardened into the expression he used in tough negotiations. I don't know what you think you've discovered, he said carefully. But business decisions from 30 years ago are hardly relevant now. Fraud is always relevant, Dad. So is betrayal. I placed copies of the most damning documents on the table between us. My mother's memo to Wilson's CEO outlining Grandpa's vulnerabilities. My father's falsified legal opinion. The backdated consulting agreement that had paid them nearly $500,000 after the sale went through. Where did you get these? My father demanded, his voice dangerous. Grandpa had copies all along, I said. He knew what you did. Both of you. My mother recovered quickly, her social mask sliding back into place. You're blowing ancient history out of proportion. Business is complicated, Amanda. Your grandfather did very well from that sale. He was robbed of millions, I countered, by his own daughter and son-in-law. Caroline had been unusually quiet, staring at the documents with growing horror. Is this true? She finally asked our parents. Did you really do this? Of course not, our mother snapped. Amanda is being dramatic as usual. But something had shifted in Caroline's expression. She turned to me. This is what Grandpa's game is about, isn't it? He's making things right. Before I could answer, a courier arrived at the door with a special delivery envelope addressed to me. Mr. Peterson said to deliver this exactly at 7 p.m., the young man explained. Inside was a third letter from Grandpa, with a handwritten note from Peterson, to be opened when the truth is laid bare. My hands shook as I broke the seal, aware of my family watching intently. I read the letter aloud, my voice growing stronger with each word. My dear family, if this letter is being read, then Amanda has discovered the truth about Riley Innovations. The betrayal I experienced at the hands of those I trusted most was the greatest disappointment of my life. But it taught me to look more closely at character, at who people truly are beneath the appearances they maintain. The will reading you attended was part of a test, one final assessment of character. The true disposition of my estate depends entirely on how each of you has behaved during this process. Everything has been observed and documented. Mr. Peterson has been instructed to arrive at the lake house at this time with a notary and witnesses to document the final phase of my estate plan. The choice of who truly inherits now depends on what has been revealed about each of you. My mother's face had gone deathly pale. My father looked like he might be sick. As if on cue, Mr. Peterson's car pulled up outside, followed by two others. My mother stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. This is ridiculous. A person can't control from the grave. We'll contest this entire charade. I wouldn't advise that, said Mr. Peterson, entering with his associates. Maxwell anticipated every possible legal challenge. Contesting will only ensure everything goes to charity as stipulated. He paused. Besides, he added, you might want to see this first. He opened his laptop and played a video. It showed my parents searching Grandpa's study the previous day. My mother tearing pages from photo albums. My father making calls about developing the property before Grandpa was even properly buried. The lake house has been equipped with recording devices for the past week, Peterson explained. Maxwell wanted to see true colors, not performances. My mother's scream could probably be heard across the lake. You had no right. This is invasion of privacy. My father lunged for the laptop, but one of Peterson's associates blocked him. Richard Riley, I'd advise against any rash actions. There are legal consequences to destroying evidence. Evidence of what? Caroline asked, her voice small. Mr. Peterson turned to her. Evidence of character, Miss Riley. And potentially evidence related to the fraud committed against Maxwell regarding Riley Innovations. He turned to me. Amanda, your grandfather left instructions that you should be the one to make the final decision once all facts were known. What decision? I asked, confused. Whether to pursue legal action against your parents for their fraud, which would likely result in criminal charges given the evidence, or to implement the alternative inheritance plan he designed. My father's face had turned ashen. You wouldn't, he said to me. We're your parents. Parents who called me a disappointment my entire life, I replied, a lifetime of hurt surfacing at once. Who dismissed my dreams? Who valued appearances over truth? Who betrayed their own father for money? What's the alternative plan? Caroline asked quietly. Peterson handed me another document. Maxwell restructured his estate to place the majority of his true fortune, approximately $24 million, plus the intellectual property rights that should have made him a billionaire, into a trust. Amanda would control this trust, with ethical oversight provisions. My mother made a strangled sound. My father seemed to age 10 years in an instant. The properties already distributed would remain with their recipients, Peterson continued. But the trust would control all liquid assets and business interests. So, she still gets everything, my mother said bitterly. Not exactly, I interjected. The trust isn't structured for personal enrichment. It's designed to fund environmental conservation efforts, educational opportunities, and ethical business investments. I'll oversee it, but with fiduciary responsibilities and an oversight board. And what about us? My father asked, his voice hollow. You keep the properties you've been given, which are substantial, but the cash distributions will be contingent on certain conditions. What conditions? Caroline asked. I met her eyes directly. Honesty. A family counseling process to address the patterns that brought us here. And for Mom and Dad, community service hours with environmental organizations. My mother laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. This isn't punishment, Mom. It's an opportunity to rebuild on a foundation of truth instead of appearances. And if we refuse, my father challenged. Then the trust document stipulates that your portion will be redirected to the Maxwell Riley Foundation, Peterson answered. It's your choice. My father stood abruptly. This is emotional blackmail. We won't be part of it. Dad. Caroline said suddenly. Stop. Just stop. She turned to me. I accept the conditions. All of them. My parents stared at her in shock. Caroline never contradicted them. I'm tired of the lies, she continued. Tired of the constant pressure to be perfect, to maintain appearances at all costs. I want something real for once. Caroline, you can't mean that, my mother gasped. I do, Mom. I've been part of the problem too long. I knew things weren't right, but went along because it was easier. I'm done with that. A heavy silence fell over the room. This is your final decision? Peterson asked me formally. I nodded. Yes. No criminal charges, but the trust implemented as Grandpa designed, with the conditions I've outlined. Very well. I'll file the necessary paperwork immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Riley, you have 48 hours to accept or decline the conditions of your continued distributions. My father's face was stone. We'll need to consult our attorney. Of course, Peterson replied, though, I should mention that Maxwell anticipated that response as well. The trust document includes a provision for legal challenges that would not work in your favor. As Peterson and his associates packed up their materials, my parents remained frozen on the sofa, the wreckage of their carefully constructed facade scattered around them. Elizabeth, Richard, Harold said gently. Maxwell didn't do this out of cruelty. He believed people could change if given the right motivation. Even at the end, he hoped you would. My mother turned away, but not before I caught the flash of something genuine in her eyes. Perhaps the first real emotion I'd seen from her in years. One by one, everyone left until only Caroline and I remained in the living room. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as we sat in silence, the weight of the day's revelation settling around us. What happens now? She finally asked. I don't know exactly, I admitted. But for the first time, whatever happens will be based on truth, not illusions. She nodded slowly. I really didn't know about Riley Innovations, Amanda. But I knew something wasn't right with Mom and Dad. I've always known. Why didn't you ever say anything? Her laugh was sad. Same reason you spent years trying to please them despite the constant criticism. They're our parents, and I was getting the benefits of being the favorite. She looked out at the lake. Grandpa liked you better, though. I was always jealous of that. He didn't like me better, I said. He saw me clearly. There's a difference. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I found Grandpa's final message, a handwritten note tucked into his favorite book on the shelf. It read, simply, the truth will set you free. But first, it will make you very uncomfortable. Worth it every time. Love you, Mandy. Standing on the dock where we had spent so many hours together, I finally understood what he had been trying to teach me all along. True wealth wasn't in bank accounts or properties. It was in the courage to see clearly, to speak truth, and to remain true to yourself, even when it would be easier to look away. 6 months passed like a dream and a lifetime all at once. The lake house had transformed from a simple cabin into the headquarters of the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Innovation. The main house remained largely unchanged, a testament to Grandpa's simple tastes and my desire to honor his memory. But the boathouse had been converted into a state-of-the-art research lab, where scientists studied sustainable technologies. I stood on the dock, watching the morning mist rise off the water, remembering how Grandpa and I used to count fish jumping before breakfast. So much had changed. Yet in the quietest moments, he still felt present. The foundation was flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. We had already funded 3 major conservation projects and established scholarships for students pursuing environmental science degrees. The Trust's ethical investment arm was backing promising startups focused on renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. The journey hadn't been smooth. The first months after the revelation were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite my decision not to pursue criminal charges, the emotional fallout was severe. I found myself alternating between righteous anger and crushing doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was I honoring Grandpa's legacy or somehow betraying it by not seeking full justice? Weekly therapy sessions became my lifeline. Dr. Marshall helped me navigate the complex grief I was experiencing. Not just for Grandpa, but for the family I had thought I had, for the parents I had spent a lifetime trying to please. Grief isn't linear, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session, and yours is complicated by betrayal and years of emotional manipulation. Be patient with yourself. My parents had reacted exactly as I'd expected. After consulting multiple attorneys and discovering that Grandpa had indeed created an ironclad trust document, they reluctantly agreed to the conditions I had set. The community service requirement was particularly galling to my mother, who complained bitterly about digging in dirt with common volunteers at the urban garden project. But something unexpected happened around the 3-month mark. My father called me, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. The watershed restoration project, he said awkwardly. It's actually interesting. The engineer explained how the natural filtration system works. It's quite ingenious, really. It wasn't an apology or even an acknowledgement of past wrongs, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall of denial and self-justification. My mother took longer. Her participation in the required family counseling sessions was initially performative at best, hostile at worst. She sat rigid and defensive, deflecting any suggestion that her actions had been harmful. We gave you girls everything, she insisted during one session. The best schools, nice clothes, family vacations. How dare you judge us for a business decision made before you were even born? The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a session when the therapist asked us each to bring a meaningful photograph. I brought the picture of Grandpa and me fishing. Caroline brought a candid shot of the four of us at her college graduation. My father chose a formal family portrait from when we were teenagers. My mother brought nothing, claiming to have forgotten the assignment. But at the end of the session, as we were gathering our things to leave, she pulled a creased photograph from her wallet and placed it silently on the table. It showed her as a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders at what appeared to be a county fair. Both were laughing, her small hands gripping his forehead, his larger one securing her legs. He taught me to be brave, she said quietly, not meeting our eyes, to climb higher than seemed safe. I don't know when I forgot that. It wasn't a full reconciliation. I doubted we would ever have the warm, supportive relationship depicted in holiday commercials, but it was a moment of genuine emotion, a glimpse of the person beneath the perfect facade. Caroline's journey surprised me most of all. Initially furious about the conditions attached to her inheritance, she had threatened to contest the will, decide with our parents. But something shifted during the revelation at the lake house. 2 weeks after the final meeting, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red from crying. I've been thinking about Grandpa, she said without preamble, about how he always asked me real questions, not about my grades or achievements, but about what I thought about things. I never gave him real answers. I just said what I thought would sound impressive. She twisted her hands in her lap. I don't think I know who I am without the act, Amanda. I've been playing a role for so long. That conversation marked the beginning of a fragile new relationship between us. Caroline reduced her hours at the investment firm and began volunteering with one of the foundation's urban education initiatives. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she discovered a genuine talent for teaching financial literacy to high school students. We weren't best friends overnight, but we were building something authentic for perhaps the first time. Coffee once a week became a tradition. Sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, but always honest. My personal life had transformed as well. The foundation work introduced me to a network of passionate environmentalists and researchers who valued substance over style. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated for my mind and contributions, rather than being measured against impossible standards. I developed a close friendship with Dr. Eliza Kaminsky, the marine biologist heading our watershed project. Her brilliant mind and dry humor made long research days fly by. When she invited me to co-author a paper on our findings, I experienced a professional confidence I'd never known before. There was also Mark, the foundation's legal advisor, whose kind eyes and thoughtful questions had gradually evolved our professional relationship into something more personal. He understood the complexity of my family situation without judgment, offering support without trying to fix everything. Our third date had been a stargazing picnic at the lake house, his idea after I mentioned Grandpa teaching me constellations. Perhaps most meaningful was the mentorship program I'd established for young girls interested in environmental science. Watching them light up during field research trips, encouraging their questions and ideas, I felt Grandpa's influence coming full circle. I was becoming for them what he had been for me, a believer in their potential and an appreciator of their unique perspectives. The most unexpected encounter came 6 months to the day after the will reading. I was hosting a community open house at the foundation headquarters when I spotted my parents across the lawn. They weren't scheduled to be there. Their community service hours were normally on Wednesdays, and this was Saturday. They stood awkwardly at the periphery, my father examining the solar array with professional curiosity, my mother clutching her handbag like a shield. When they saw me notice them, my father gave a stiff nod. My mother attempted a smile that didn't quite succeed. I walked over, unsure what to expect. The facility looks impressive, my father said formally. Very professional operation. Thank you, I replied. We're particularly proud of the wetlands reconstruction. It's already showing improved water quality. My mother glanced around at the other attendees. Your grandfather would have approved, she said finally. He always did prefer practical applications to theory. Coming from her, this was practically effusive praise. I noticed she was wearing the simple pearl earrings Grandpa had given her for her 21st birthday. Jewelry she had previously dismissed as too plain. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. They stayed for almost an hour, asking occasional questions, maintaining careful politeness. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation exactly, but it was acknowledgement of the foundation, of my work, of reality beyond appearances. As they were leaving, my mother paused. "Your sister mentioned you found Maxwell's journal." I was wondering. She stopped, seemingly unable to formulate her request. "There are some entries about you," I said, understanding what she couldn't ask. "From when you were young, happy memories. I could share copies if you'd like." Something flickered across her face. Regret, perhaps, or longing. "I would, thank you." That evening, I sat in Grandpa's study, my study now, reading the journal he had left specifically for, after the dust settles. Unlike the evidence and letters that had driven the revelations, this was simply his private thoughts, observations about life and family spanning decades. One entry, dated shortly after he discovered the truth about Riley Innovations, caught my heart. "The hardest lesson of my life has been learning that we can love people deeply and still not truly know them. Elizabeth was the light of my life from the moment she was born. Yet somewhere along the way, she became someone I don't recognize." Do we fail as parents when our children choose values so different from our own? Or is it simply the price of allowing them to be individuals? I cannot change their choices now. But perhaps I can still teach my granddaughters the value of integrity, especially Mandy, who sees the world with such clear eyes. Tears blurred my vision as I traced his handwriting with my fingertip. Even in his profound disappointment, he had been thinking of teaching, of growth, of future possibilities. The final page contained what I now considered my life manifesto, written in Grandpa's bold script: "The greatest inheritance isn't money or property or even education. It's the clarity to see truth and the courage to stand for it. Everything else is just details." I closed the journal and walked out to the dock as the sun set over the lake. A fish jumped, creating ripples that spread in ever-widening circles. One small movement affecting everything around it, just like truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Community garden meeting went well. Mom actually participated. Small steps." I smiled and typed back, "Progress, not perfection." Dinner Sunday. Looking out over the water, turned golden by the setting sun, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. The inheritance he had truly left wasn't the money or the property or even the foundation. It was this, the freedom that comes from living authentically, from recognizing that our worth isn't measured in dollars or appearances, but in the courage to see clearly and act with integrity. The greatest wealth, I had learned, was the ability to build a life that reflected my true values, not someone else's expectations. And that, finally, was a legacy worth protecting. Have you ever discovered an unexpected truth that completely changed how you saw your family?